Thank you, Jim.
Okay, unless something really surprising happens, there's gonna be no seismology or paleoseismology in this talk, and it is, I think Ashley mentioned earlier, this is kind of, this is science light. It's really, it was a lark more than anything else, but it had its roots in science. And so this title slide kind of gives you the idea of where I'm going with this. It's basically some examples of matching photographs that were taken 100 years ago along the Central Oregon Cascade Range. But the project really got started with my first job with the USGS as a postdoc at the Cascade Volcano Observatory, starting in early 1991. And the project was to look at a sequence of debris flows, historic debris flows that occurred in the Three Sisters and Mount Jefferson areas of the Central Oregon Cascades, and which were viewed and to some degree still are viewed as a hazard up there. And the story of these debris flows was that nestled up against many of the stratovolcanoes of Central Oregon Cascades are glaciers, and these glaciers at their maximum extent of Little Ice Age deposited these pretty tall moraines. So these moraines were being actively deposited by this glacier in the mid 1800s. So as these glaciers pulled back behind quite a few of these moraines impounded these lakes. And some of these lakes have breached the moraine dams, causing debris flows downstream. In fact, between the Three Sisters, Mount Jefferson, and Three Finger Jack, there's been about a dozen of these debris flows since the early 1900s that from breaches or partial breaches of these lakes. In fact, this photo was taken in 1966, and the following summer, this lake partially breached, leading to a debris flow that traveled several kilometers downstream, and actually covered the highway. Nobody's been hurt in any of these debris flows yet, but as I said, they still some of these lakes are thought to still pose a hazard. This is a view of one of these. This is a 1956 photograph showing the path of one of these debris flows from a lake that was sitting in this basin here, which is impounded by the Little Ice Age moraines of Collier Glacier, one of the larger glaciers in one of the larger glaciers in Oregon, actually. To tell this story of the debris flows, which really, the main driver of the story was the retreat of the ice, the 20th century retreat of the ice. And one effective way to tell the story was matching photographs. So there's quite a few very early 1900 photographs that were taken of glaciers in the Three Sisters area. And as part of this project in the early 90s with USGS photographer Dave Wheatbrick, we went and matched several photos. Now this is Collier Glacier, the one that in the early 1900s, that ice has dropped below the crest of the moraines, but it's still butted up against them. And this is a 1993 match of that photograph. You can see a couple people for scale here. two people there, not the same ones, in that photograph. So as a graduate student, I'd been mentored by a few folks who matched photographs, and you know, we did this as part of this project, and I was kind of hooked by this. And these photographs in 1993 were the last of the government-sponsored photo matching, but friends and actually the same colleagues who helped me with this photo matching went back up into the Three Sisters area in 2003 and in 2010 to make centennial matches of many of these photographs taken 100 years to the day, as near as we could tell from when the originals were. And so that was that's sort of the background for why I've been keep going up there. It's mainly an excuse to go backpacking in the high country with friends and family, and I've kept doing it. I want to also point out, so this photograph is taken, this pair is taken from the southern flank of Little Brother, looking up towards the headwater to the source area of Collier Glacier. There's a place here called Glacier View, which has been a long-standing place for people to observe Collier Glacier. And here's an aerial view of Glacier View sitting on the edge of Collier Cone, sort of a Holocene Volcanic Center. And photographers have been standing here looking up towards Collier Glacier. Here are the little ice age rain crest. The lake that reached was in here, and it reached out through there. But to talk about this place, I first have to one of a few tangents. A couple of them are planned. There might be some unplanned tangents, but I have to mention Ruth Hobson Keene, and she took a dozen or so photos from Glacier View, starting in 1934. Her last photo was taken in 1973, so basically 40 years worth of photos. And some of these photographs appeared in her dissertation, 1946 dissertation, on the Mackenzie River Valley. And Collier Glacier is basically at the headwaters of the Mackenzie River system. And this was a 600-page dissertation focused on the geology and natural history of the Mackenzie Valley and its educational significance. Well, of that 600 pages, maybe 5.5 pages, basically 6 to 11, were on the educational significance. The other 595 pages were on the science. Well, the reason for that educational significance was her degree was obtained from the education department at Cornell University. And can anybody speculate why that might have been the case?
Beginning of climate change.
What's that?
The beginning of climate change.
No, because yeah. Women were not allowed to get geology PhDs at Cornell in the 40s, apparently. And she was still upset about that when I met her in the early 90s. She was a spark plug in many ways. And at beer, we can maybe I can tell you some stories. But she took, as I said, a dozen or so photos from Glacier View between 1934 and 1973. And let's see what I do here. So 1934, 1973. Here's her. This wasn't in 73, but pretty soon, not too many years before that, at Glacier View, setting up her camera. And just so you can kind of see the punchline, here's what it looked like a couple years ago from the same place. This is Collier Glacier from Glacier View. And so at the time we were working up there, her 1934 photo was the earliest one that I knew about from Glacier View. But there is this Mount Monoma book that was published in 1925 by Edwin T. Hodge, and in there, there's kind of a murky black and white. There's a murky reproduction of a photo taken from pretty close to Glacier View. There's a guy with a elk horn in the foreground there, and well, first of all, how many people have heard about Mount Multnomah? And it was kind of the twin of Mount Mazama. That was what was envisioned. Here's Hodge's rendition of Mount Multnomah looming over the three sisters. And I know we all aspire to have our reports having their own Wikipedia entry, as Mount Multnomah does, but this is probably not the type of entry you want for our report. An invalidated hypothetical ancient volcano. But I will mention something about Hodge. He was an early member of the faculty at University of Oregon, and then they had some reorganization, and he came up to Portland and taught geology up here as an extension of Oregon State University. I'm not sure exactly how that worked, but he was the founder of the Geological Society of the Oregon Country Group, the GSOC, that has I guess their headquarters down below us here. And he was also John Elliott Allen's master thesis advisor, and John Elliott Allen was essentially the founder of the geology department here. So there's a connection with Hodge. Well, it took quite a bit of work, but I figured out where that photo and Hodge came from. It was a United States Forest Service photo. It was taken by Frederick W. Cleater, who was a recreational planner for the Forest Service, and it was taken in the summer of 1920. And during that summer, what Cleater was doing was surveying a route for what he called the Oregon Skyline Trail. He was surveying it and signposting it, and over the course of this survey, which extended basically from early July to early October, summer 1920, we took about 700 photographs, and as I learned about these photographs, the wheels started cranking. Okay, well, maybe in 2020, we can relocate some of these photos and take them. And it became, in the end, it became kind of consuming. But the Skyline Trail, I'll talk a little bit about that. It was first envisioned not as just a hiking trail or horsebacking trail. It was also, there was also a road that was envisioned. The idea was that they were going to build a road basically from Crater Lake to Mount Hood along the crest of the Cascades. And part of the motivation was at the time, the historic highway through the gorge had just been completed a few years prior. The highway up to Crater Lake had just been completed and the lodge was up there. And the Forest Service was really interested in expanding recreational opportunities and getting the public up into these Forest Service lands. And as part of that, they hired this recreational planner, Cleater, and one of Cleater's first job was to survey a path for this road and trail. The newspaper accounts of the Times focused on the road. It became very clear to Cleater just a couple weeks into the summer's trip that the road was going to be a real challenge, and his focus became the trail. And so between July 9th and October 9th, he and his crew, which consisted of a road engineer, a cook, a packer, and then two what were called grazing examiners, or basically forest biologists, 9 horses and 4 carrier pigeons started this trip up. They basically went from south to north and signposted this trail. And then very quickly, by the next summer, it was a thing. It was being advertised by the Forest Service. The route was mapped out, although there was no actual trail. It was just a route with a few signs on it. Some of it followed existing roads and routes, trapper trails, indigenous trails, sheep herder trails, but it really didn't become a full-fledged trail until the 1930s. And of course, the Skyline Trail morphed into, was largely incorporated into the Pacific Crest Trail when that was officially designated in, I can't remember exactly the year, late 60s or early 70s. And now there's 1,000 hikers a year that are hiking the Pacific Crest Trail that runs from Mexico all the way to the Canadian border. There's quite a few origin stories for the Pacific Crest Trail, but I think Cleater's diary entry from August 1st has to be included in that. I'm beginning to think that the Skyline Trail, the full length of the Cascades in Washington, Oregon, joining a similar trail in the Sierras of California would be a great tourist advertisement. For that matter, it might be continued through British Columbia and up the Alaska Islands. This is future work, but it would be fine to plan upon. So I don't think it makes it up to Alaska yet, but it certainly has been joined up with California and Washington. So the Cleater's photos, like I said, he took about 700 of them during this trip. You can see the type of camera set up, a large camera on the tripod. He was not a professional photographer. And so the photographs aren't necessarily great. They got better during the course of the summer, and he would talk to photographers about how to improve his technique, but they're good enough. It was a little bit of work trying to figure out the fate of these photographs, and for most of them, I don't know what the fate is, but about 200 of the negatives for these photographs are in National Archives in College Park, Maryland. And I snuck a trip there in 2016 and looked at them. There are these, they're about this big, the negatives, so they're large format negatives. A lot of the negatives are kind of scratched up and broken, so they're not great, but it was kind of cool to actually see them. And then from the negatives and from the microfiche records of these photographs, I selected about 100 to have scanned to get sort of high resolution images of these photographs. And then in the next few years, figured out where these photographs were taken from a combination of his field notes that I had a transcribed copy of, from the photo logs that National Archives had of each photograph, and from just Google Earth and knowing a little bit about terrain, I could get pretty approximate idea of where many of these photographs were taken. And then in the years leading up to it, with help from a lot of friends, sort of scouted locations for these photographs. And then in 2020, which was kind of a weird year, as folks might remember, went out there with colleagues and friends and started actually making the matches. And of the 100 photographs that I scanned, I matched about 70 of them, 40 of them to the day, 100 years to the day of when the original was taken, another 20 within a day or two, and then another bunch that for reasons of fire or the fact that I had a job, I couldn't actually get to, so those matches are several days off from Cleater's timing. But it was, here's what the scene would look like. This is one of the early photos from Clear Lake. I'd go there with my camera and the print of the photo, and then just try to line things up. And so here's Cleater's photo from July 12th, 1920, Wizard Island. This is from near the lodge. And here's what it looked like 100 years later. I'm a few meters to the left of Cleater's position. Sometimes it was hard to line things up perfectly, but it's pretty cool, I think. I mean, I just keep going back and forth and looking at it. It's kind of addicting. This set was a panorama, and this is a common thing. There's been a lot of tree growth since Cleater's time, but you can see that some of these trees are still in the same place. Oh, here's a badly damaged negative, but scanned nonetheless, of Crater Lake Lodge. The position where I had just been was kind of over here. And here's kind of what it looks like now. It's a completely new lodge building, but you can see a little bit of the old wing there. The watchman in the background, that hasn't moved very much. And the type of cars have changed. So this is kind of this is where that photo was taken from. You can see him set up right here. It's not a fancy camera, it's just a high-end point and shoot, but it worked. And so a lot of the places where, well, not a lot, a few places where Cleater took his photos have transformed a fair bit, have been paved over, literally. But there's quite a few photos that Cleater made that when I reoccupied, I'm pretty sure that I'm not really that sure, but I may have been the first person after Cleater to stand in that spot. Some of these places were truly in the middle of nowhere. Here's another 3-photo panorama of Crater Lake. Excuse me. This one was taken on July 18th, and my match was on July 17th. And there's a pretty entertaining story about why I didn't make it the match on the 18th, and we can talk about that over over beer. But what's kind of cool, this white bark pine in the foreground here, I'm pretty sure is this guy right there. So here's a close-up of from that set of Wizard Island, and if you excuse me, well, you know, I sort of titled this presentation "The Changing Skyline," but for the most part, the skyline has not changed. It's really the one thing that has been stable, but it's kind of a play on the skyline trail idea. But if you do look, if you go back and forth, you can see that well, you can see the skyline does not really change. You can see that some of the same trees are still there. But you can see some differences if you look closely. There's more snow patches in 100 years ago. The water is a little bit lower now than it was 100 years ago. You can see some new development up on the rim. I think that's the lodge buildings right up there. Oops. Oh, so there are some changes, and for the next 20 minutes or so, that's what I'm going to focus on. So some of the changes that you can see in these photographs, and in the start, here's a view at the north end of Clear Lake National Park of the Pumice Desert, and if you look at it, looks like now you can see there's fewer horses now than there were back then. There's more trees. So some of these changes, I'm just going to go over. I'm going to start off with what's been the most profound change to the high country, and that's the snow and ice, and you know, it's really what you know, motivated the photo matching from the very beginning. This is from the summit of Diamond Peak, looking north. This may not have been a glacier in 1920, but you can see green rim there. But oh, I'm pushing the wrong buttons. Let's go. You can see Levitt Pass ski area right there. That wasn't there in. Oh. Okay, the glacier view in Collier Glacier. This is, I didn't know about this photo until I got to National Archives and saw what they had there. This is from basically the same place that Ruth Hobson took her photos starting in 1934. And by the way, that's my aspirational centennial match is in 2034. I'll be 75. I'm kind of hoping I can do it, but that's what I'm shooting for. And you know, given that 40 years ago, my aspirational goal is to make it to year 2000. I'm gonna. That was a tangent. Okay, so 1920, September 8th. I couldn't make it there September 8th, 2020, because we had a little bit of a fire issue in September 2020. I got up as soon as I get up there. It was the 28th. But the thing is, it's getting pretty hard to actually see Collier Glacier from glacier view. And then what's even a little bit more terrifying is I went back there in 2021, and just over that year, you can see how much thinning there has been up in the accumulation area. So snow and ice, that's a lot less of that, and that's no surprise. One thing that's been kind of interesting to look at is how water levels have changed. Cleater took a lot of photos of lakes, and this is Diamond Lake. This is the south shore of Diamond Lake, looking towards Mount Thielsen, and here's what it looked like in 100 years later. Here, the lake level has gone up, and that's a common thing. A lot of lakes, because they've been impoundments placed at the outlets that have raised lake levels. So what was really a nice beach is now not quite so nice a beach, but I guess the lake is bigger. Other lakes that have controlled outlets have gone down. So this is Crescent Lake looking towards Diamond Peak, and here's what it looked like 100 years later. Wattle Lake, you kind of think of Wattle Lake as being, and what is one of the most beautiful lakes in the Cascades. That is, but it's not pristine either. Its lake level has gone up. You can see some of the same rocks here. That lake level has been raised. Big Lake up near Santiam Pass. This lake is uncontrolled. There is no outlet works on that, and that lake level has gone down by a good meter and a half. And that's got to be because of changed hydrological conditions. Another thing that's been pretty astounding in looking at these photographs, and I first realized this in 2010 when we matched a bunch of photos taken in the Three Sisters area in 1910 by a professional photographer who accompanied Mazama's climbing club trip up there. A beautiful set of photos. We matched a whole bunch of them, and one thing that was really interesting about those matches was how much the vegetation has changed. And this is a pretty classic situation, especially along in the lower elevations in the lakes. What were open ponderosa pine forest stands are now have been invaded by these lodgepole pine thickets, and that's primarily an outcome of harvest and fire suppression practices. But it's just not the low country, it's a high country too. So this is Moraine Lake near South Sister, and you can just see how much denser the vegetation is. And this is a tree line thing. Tree line has gone up. There's no, and it's not a harvest or a management. It's not a thing. It's a climate thing. Here's a few more pairs that sort of demonstrate that. This is a view from the northwestern shoulder of Broken Top, looking towards South Sister and Middle Sister on the right. North Sister on the right, Middle Sister is kind of partly camouflaged in the. But let's just see how much more vegetation there's been. You can see how much smaller the two glaciers coming off of. I guess this is Middle Sister here. Yeah, two glaciers coming off Middle Sister have shrunk too. Here's a view north towards South Sister from Mirror Lake, and the camera is within inches of where my camera position is within inches of where Cleater is positioned. was, and the trees have just gotten taller. And the species have changed too, which is interesting, and I'd like to learn more about that. To beat that point to the ground, here's another. Okay, so both of our trips were affected by fire in different ways. Creeder had his camp caught on fire, probably something to do with the cook and the cook's tent or whatever. I like this last line though, that, you know, they salvaged some stuff and they found many articles which have been missing for some time. Well, we had a fire issue in September of 2020 as well. This is, of course, is those devastating fires that affected a lot of the Western Cascade valleys, and it affected the photo matching work in a fairly significant way as well. In fact, on September 7th, I was on about day 9 of a 12-day backpacking trip in the Three Sisters area, attempting to match quite a few photos that Creeder had made in that area. I was with Virginia Butler, who is in the anthropology department here, and I was going to be met by my wife and a few friends on September 7th at the north end of that, as part of the last part of the trip. Well, I get a text message and then a phone call from my wife the morning of the 7th, and it wasn't a question. She just told me, okay, you guys got to hike out now. I'm going to pick you up at the trailhead. And because this fire thing is crazy. So we did, and it was the right thing because we drove down the Mackenzie Valley after being picked up at the trailhead, and the fires drove down the Mackenzie Valley about 3 hours later. And we would have been okay where we were, but it'd been really hard to get out. So Creeder took this photo on September 7th, 1920. This was one I was really looking forward to matching. I took a rushed match on the way out. And the timing is all wrong. Creeder's photo was taken in the afternoon. This is taken midday in the morning. It's a little bit smoky. So I go, okay, this is one of the money shots. I got to go back the next year and get it. So I did. But I'm persistent. I went back. So this is something that's changed in the 30 years I've been going up there. When I first started going up there, of course, fires happened, but it wasn't something that you thought about as being likely to affect your work up there. But now it is. It's like almost every September, parts of the forest are closed or it's really smoky. That is different. There certainly were fires, early in the 20th century. This September view, a 1920 view of Mount Washington and Three Finger Jack from Belknap Crater shows the pretty amazing burned area here. And there were pretty extensive fires in the Oregon Cascades in 1910. That might be from that. I'm not sure. But what's kind of interesting about this, so this is 2020, and you can see recent scars from 2006, 2011. what's kind of cool is you can actually see that burn scar from pre-1920, and and those old burns affect how the more recent fires behave because the vegetation patterns are different. So the other thing that's changed up there is the human use of the landscape. And so here's a view of Crescent Lake. Cleater and his crew are catching breakfast out there. Here's what it'll look like 100 years later. A little different. I usually crop the photos and match, but this one I couldn't do it just because there was this is just too telling of a element in the photograph. This kind of looks like the morning after, doesn't it? Cleater traveled by horseback, and that was the primary intent of the Skyline Trail would be a horsebacking trail. Backpacking was not a thing at the time, and that affected how the trail was laid out. When backpacking became more prevalent, the trail was often moved to be shorter and higher. For horsepacking, it was important to have a place to be able to graze the horses every 10 miles or so. So it would go through meadows, and that's where the main camps were. It was also fishing was more of an emphasis. So lakes were a primary target, and Cleater would try out many of these lakes while he was scouting to make sure that the fishing and swimming conditions were appropriate for the Skyline Trail. So not so many horses. What is kind of interesting though is where the Pacific Crest Trail diverges from the original route of the Skyline Trail. In a lot of places, the Skyline Trail has been preserved to some degree, and the horse people will still use those segments of the Skyline Trail, and that's something I had no clue about until I'm sort of poking around on the old parts of the Skyline Trail, and I met a lot of horse people, and they're okay. Our methods from our human communication methods have changed. Here is the Cleater party sending their timesheets in from the summit of South Sister by carrier pigeon. And here's Charlie. Notifying somebody of something from the same spot by cell phone. Back in early 1900s, a lot of these alpine meadows were essentially overrun by sheep, and Cleater complained about that. So now there's a lot less sheep, so not everything is bad up there. In fact, Cleater commented or reported a commentary on the sheep. Saw a sheep man today, and he was complaining about so many campers in the McKenzie Summit region. I saw no campers, but I wonder what they would have to say about the sheep. Cleater did mention that a few times he did have mutton for dinner, so I think he took advantage. Okay, so this is the town of Sisters. Here's the Hotel Sisters. We're kind of looking west along the main drag of Sisters, and I saw this pair of photos, and I go, how did he get those? Because it's pretty flat there, and I go, you know, there were airplanes at the time, but he didn't say anything about getting an airplane. So I was talking to Forest Service folks about, you know, how he might have gotten this photo. By the way, you can see a whole bunch of sheep out there. And it turns out there used to be this fire tower at the east end of town. And it was basically a ponderosa pine stem, a bowl that had been de-limbed. It was 120 feet tall and had this, basically this ladder tacked to it and then a platform at the top. So Cleater climbed up there. There was a few photos that Cleater took that I did not match because I was too chicken. And he went to places I would not go. And this would have been one of them. But I had some colleagues, one of them had a drone. And so we actually went and matched this photo, which was kind of fun, one early Sunday morning. So here's Cleater's photo. And we didn't get the drone in exactly the right place, but we got pretty close. Here's the Hotel Sisters right there. Now it's the Sisters Bar and Saloon. So that's in the same place. Everything else, except for one building, is new. There were big fires that swept through Sisters in 1924 and 1925. But if you look at this house right there, it's right here. Pretty cool. I don't, the photo, it's, so, okay, so, 100 years ago, Cleater had this vision for the Skyline Trail. Parts of it came true. The trail became a thing. Some parts didn't. The road never happened. The airstrips in Clear Lake National Park didn't happen. But a lot of it did come to be, and it really did help open up the Central Oregon Cascades to recreation use. I would also say Cleater over his career, another quarter century working as a recreation planner, was also a big part of that. A lot of the places that he camped, set up camp on this trip, became campgrounds. So he was a major force in the recreational development of the Central Oregon Cascades. I don't think he would have anticipated what the Skyline Trail has become in terms of the Pacific. I mean, he did anticipate, California to Mexico to Canada trail, but I don't think he would have anticipated, the hundreds, if not thousands of hikers that are doing that every year, and how that backpacking experience is so different than the high country recreation of the time. He probably had an inkling that snow and ice conditions were changing, and he probably had an inkling that, because these trends were already happening by 1920. He probably knew that there were going to be fewer sheep down the road because that was already happening, but the changes in vegetation, those he probably did not anticipate. So it's kind of cool that from looking at these photos, you can see some of these things. So I guess my final slide is just, I had a ton of help with this project, all sorts of people. It was a lot of fun. So too many folks to name, but scouting locations, coming with me on these trips. It was kind of a weird time. It was right, it was the first COVID summer. So we were careful. We were all masked up, or we were socially distanced. So I guess with that I'll end. Maybe we have time for a question or two.
Time maybe for one question, and then hopefully more I wrote.